Book 1, Part 4 of the Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1. Translated by Alfred John Church and William Jackson Brodrib. Book 1. A.D. 14 and 15, Part 4. And so the Roman army, now on the spot, 6 years after the disaster, in grief and anger, began to bury the bones of the 3 legions, not a soldier knowing whether he was interring the relics of a relative or a stranger, but looking on all as kinsfolk and of their own blood, while their wrath rose higher than ever against the foe. In raising the barrow, Caesar laid the first sod, rendering thus a most welcome honor to the dead, and sharing also in the sorrow of those present. This Tiberius did not approve, either interpreting unfavorably every act of Germanicus, or because he thought that the spectacle of the slain and unburied made the army slow to fight and more afraid of the enemy, and that a general invested with the augurate and its very ancient ceremonies ought not to have polluted himself with funeral rites. Germanicus, however, pursued Arminius as he fell back into trackless wilds, and as soon as he had the opportunity, ordered his cavalry to sally forth and scour the plains occupied by the enemy. Arminius, having bidden his men to concentrate themselves and keep close to the woods, suddenly wheeled round, and soon gave those whom he had concealed in the forest passes the signal to rush to the attack. Thereupon our cavalry was thrown into disorder by this new force, and some cohorts in reserve were sent, which, broken by the shock of flying troops, increased the panic. They were being pushed into a swamp, well known to the victorious assailants, perilous to men unacquainted with it, when Caesar led forth his legions in battle array. This struck terror into the enemy, and gave confidence to our men, and they separated without advantage to either. Soon afterwards Germanicus led back his army to the Amisia, taking his legions by the fleet as he had brought them up. Part of the cavalry was ordered to make for the Rhine along the sea-coast. Caecina, who commanded a division of his own, was advised, though he was returning by a route which he knew, to pass long bridges with all possible speed. This was a narrow road amid vast swamps, which had formerly been constructed by Lucius Domitius. On each side were quagmires of thick, clinging mud, or perilous with streams. Around were woods of a gradual slope, which Arminius now completely occupied, as soon as by a short route and quick march he had outstripped troops heavily laden with baggage and arms. As Caecina was in doubt how he could possibly replace bridges which were ruinous with age, and at the same time hold back the enemy, he resolved to encamp on the spot, that some might begin the repair and others the attack. The barbarians attempted to break through the outposts, and throw themselves on the engineering parties, which they harassed, pacing round them and continually charging them. There was a confused din from the men at work and the combatants. Everything alike was unfavorable to the Romans, the place with its deep swamps, insecure to the foot and slippery as one advanced, limbs burdened with coats of mail, and the impossibility of aiming their javelins amid the water. The Cherusci, on the other hand, were familiar with fighting in fens. They had huge frames, and lances long enough to inflict wounds even at a distance. Night at last released the legions, which were now wavering from a disastrous engagement. The Germans, whom success rendered unwearied, without even then taking any rest, turned all the streams which rose from the slopes of the surrounding hills into the lands beneath. The ground being thus flooded, and the completed portion of our works submerged, the soldiers' labor was doubled. This was Caecina's 40th campaign as a subordinate or a commander, and with such experience of success and peril he was perfectly fearless. As he thought over future possibilities, he could devise no plan but to keep the enemy within the woods till the wounded and the more encumbered troops were in advance. For between the hills and the swamps there stretched a plain which would admit of an extended line. the legions had their assigned places, the 5th on the right wing, the 21st on the left, the men of the 1st to lead the van, and the 20th to repel pursuers. It was a restless night for different reasons. The barbarians in their festivity, filling the valleys under the hills and the echoing glens with merry song or savage shouts, while in the Roman camp were flickering fires, broken exclamations, and the men lay scattered along the entrenchments, or wandering from tent to tent, wakeful rather than watchful. A ghastly dream appalled the general. He seemed to see Quintilius Varus, covered with blood, rising out of the swamps, and to hear him, as it were, calling to him, but he did not, as he imagined, obey the call. He even repelled his hand, as he stretched it over to him. At daybreak the legions, posted on the wings, from panic or perversity, deserted their position, and hastily occupied a plain beyond the morass. Yet Arminius, though free to attack, did not, at the moment, rush out on them. But when the baggage was clogged in the mud and in the fosses, the soldiers around it in disorder, the array of the standards in confusion, everyone in selfish haste and all ears deaf to the word of command, he ordered the Germans to charge, exclaiming again and again, "Behold a Varus, and legions once more entangled in Varus's fate." As he spoke he cut through the columns with some picked men, inflicting wounds chiefly on the horses. Staggering in their blood on the slippery marsh, they took off their riders, driving hither and thither all in their way, and trampling on the fallen. The struggle was hottest round the eagles, which could neither be carried in the face of the storm of missiles, nor planted in the miry soil. Caecina, while he was keeping up the battle, fell from his horse, which was pierced under him, and was being hemmed in, when the first legion threw itself in the way. The greed of the foe helped him, for they left the slaughter to secure the spoil, and the legions, towards evening, struggled on to an open and firm ground. Nor did this end their miseries. Entrenchments had to be thrown up, materials sought for earthworks, while the army had lost to a great extent their implements for digging earth and cutting turf. There were no tents for the rank and file, no comforts for the wounded. As they shared their food, soiled by mire or blood, they bewailed the darkness with its awful omen, and the one day which yet remained to so many thousand men. It chanced that a horse, which had broken its halter and wandered wildly in fright at the uproar, overthrew some men against whom it dashed. Thence arose such a panic, from the belief that the Germans had burst into the camp, that all rushed to the gates. Of these the Decuman gate was the point chiefly sought, as it was furthest from the enemy, and safer for flight. Caecina, having ascertained that the alarm was groundless, yet being unable to stop or stay the soldiers by authority or entreaties or even by force, threw himself to the ground in the gateway, and at last, by an appeal to their pity, as they would have had to pass over the body of their commander, closed the way. At the same moment the tribunes and the centurions convinced them that it was a false alarm. Having then assembled them at his headquarters and ordered them to hear his words in silence, he reminded them of the urgency of the crisis. Their safety, he said, lay in their arms, which they must, however, use with discretion. They must remain within the entrenchments till the enemy approached closer in the hope of storming them. Then there must be a general sortie. By that sortie the Rhine must be reached. Whereas, if they fled, more forest, deeper swamps, and a savage foe awaited them. But if they were victorious, glory and renown would be theirs. He dwelt on all that was dear to them at home, all that testified to their honor in the camp, without any allusion to disaster. Next he handed over the horses, beginning with his own, of the officers and tribunes, to the bravest fighters in the army, quite impartially, that these first and then the infantry might charge the enemy. There was as much restlessness in the German host with its hopes, its eager longings, and the conflicting opinions of its chiefs. Arminius advised that they should allow the Romans to quit their position, and when they had quitted it, again surprise them in swampy and intricate ground. Inguiomerus, with fiercer counsels, heartily welcomed barbarians, was for beleaguering the entrenchments in armed array, as to storm them would, he said, be easy,